Greetings! In a past YouTube episode, arugula was grown by our hydroponic method, all of the nutrient solution was added before planting, and the arugula crop was harvested in one cutting. The quantity of original nutrient solution was sufficient for the entire crop, so no additions were needed. Professor Janik, one of the developers of the slow-bolting Adagio variety of arugula, asked me to see if it is possible to take multiple cuttings, a sort of cut and come again concept. I realized the growing tanks would run out of nutrient solution soon after the first cutting. Is it possible to automatically supply nutrient solution to the growing tanks? Today we will discuss how to employ a float valve to continuously supply nutrient solution to this longer cropping season for arugula. Most folks would prefer to just buy a commercial float valve, but I like to make my own. A wooden block is fastened to the lid of a yogurt container, and a 1/4 inch micro tubing with a tubing connector fitting is inserted through the block and lid. A strip of 1/4 inch neoprene foam is attached by a sticky side to a 1 inch thick block of extruded polystyrene foam. A rising water level will cause the block to rise such that the neoprene foam presses against the tubing connector nozzle and stops the water flow. By the way, there was a previous YouTube with more details on this yogurt container float valve. Now, 2 slightly undersized holes are drilled into the yogurt container, and 2 short pieces of 1/4 inch tubing are inserted. A 1 inch thick polystyrene block is placed in the container, followed by the block with the neoprene foam. The lid is snapped on, and we have a float valve that costs about $1. Nutrient solution will flow out of both of these tubes into the growing tanks. 1/4 inch diameter tubing was inserted into a slightly undersized hole in the growing tank. The outer portion of the tubing was inserted into Tygon tubing. Then the Tygon tubing was connected to the float valve. This was done for both growing tanks. It works. Water is flowing into the tank. The automatic refilling system consists of an elevated storage tank and a float valve connected to 2 growing tanks. Here's the front side of the system. Water was added to the tank from a hose. Fertilizer stock solution A was added. Stock solution A contains 1 pound of ChemGrow 81536 plus 0.6 pounds of magnesium sulfate per gallon of water. Fertilizer stock solution B was added. Stock solution B contains 1 pound of solution grade calcium nitrate plus, as an option, 1 teaspoon of iron chelate per gallon of water. The tanks were filled to about 3/4 inch from the top. The electrical conductivity of the nutrient solution was 1.5 millisiemens or ms. The storage tank was filled with water, and fertilizer stock solutions A and B were added to a strength of 1.5 ms. The height of the float valve was adjusted so that nutrient solution did not flow into the tanks at this time. Tanks were covered with fiberglass window screen for mosquito control. The screen was pressed into its proper place with this handy-dandy device, and expanded polystyrene covers were placed on the tanks and are ready for 8 plants. But what is this extra hole for? Well, it's for a float indicator which measures the nutrient solution depth and consists of a thin strip of expanded polystyrene inside of a PVC pipe. Net pots were placed in the tanks, and 1-week-old arugula seedlings growing in seedling blocks were transplanted. In retrospect, it would have been better to transplant 3-week-old seedlings because that would allow the selection of the best and most vigorous seedlings and provide more uniformity amongst plants. The plants are pretty small on the planting date, which is February 10th. 16 days later, and the plants have grown. Actually, this would have been a better transplanting size. Also, notice that I covered the float valve to protect it from the sunlight. 4 days later, and one plant seems to be more vigorous than the rest. It's 26 days after transplanting, and the plants clearly lack uniformity. I probably should abandon this experiment and start again, but I'm going to go with what I've got. It's 41 days after transplanting, and this tank has 4 pretty good sized plants. And the other tank has 3 pretty decent plants. I'm going to go ahead and take the first harvest, but we'll be very conservative and only cut the large leaves. The first tank yielded 100 grams, and the second tank yielded 80 grams. This is what the plants looked like after the first harvest. So you can see that I was very careful not to overcut the plants. By this time, the nutrient solution level has dropped, and the float valve is maintaining the level at about 2 inches depth. 8 days have passed, and the arugula has been growing well. And 6 plants in each tank are harvestable. This time I harvested the arugula a little bit more aggressively, but did not cut the smaller inner leaves. Yields for the second harvest were nearly double that of the first harvest, weighing in at 230 grams and 150 grams. A week later, and it was surprising how much regrowth occurred in only a week. Plants in the second tank were darker than those in the first tank, and I really don't know why. The third harvest was trimmed about the same as the second harvest, and plenty of regrowth leaves were left. Yields were a little bit lower this harvest, weighing in at 130 grams and 120 grams. I waited 2 weeks before the fourth harvest, and the arugula grew mightily in those 2 weeks. But there is still a color difference between the 2 tanks, and it has me baffled. Well, I became a little lazy and impatient and just made a more or less flat cut, but left about a 1-inch stubble. Now, this is more like it. Yields were 300 grams and 360 grams. Plants grew back slowly after the extreme cut following harvest 4. Several plants never recovered and just died. Apparently, a severe cutting impedes regrowth. Even though 22 days had passed since the last harvest, the yields were only 240 grams and 160 grams. Since I needed to take an extended trip, this was to be the final harvest, and the plants were completely cut back. As evidenced by the float indicators, the float valve-controlled automatic watering system worked flawlessly and maintained a constant liquid level throughout the growing period. 5 cuttings were harvested during a 92-day growing period. 1 tank yielded 1,000 grams, and the other tank yielded 870 grams of arugula. Here is a yield calculation. The tank size was 3.13 square feet. The 1,000 gram yield in the left tank is equal to 2.2 pounds. This calculates to 0.7 pounds per square foot of tank area per 92 days for the 5 harvests. Yield could have been significantly increased by using older and more uniform seedlings. How should arugula be cut so that it will produce another crop? This might be described as being too conservative. This is definitely too extreme. And this is just right. I would like to offer my congratulations to the breeding team of Morales, Maynard, and Janik for developing the Adagio Arugula cultivar, which did not bolt during this growing period where 5 cuttings were taken. So there you have it, folks. an automatic watering system for hydroponic tanks so that you can grow cut and come again arugula and hopefully other crops. And now it's time to bid you a fond aloha.